Well, Iran elects a man to the presidency who is credibly accused of mass murder. Ebrahim Raisi was elected president in a supposed landslide victory on Friday heading into the weekend. But of course, I use that term loosely because in addition to a historically low voter turnout prompted by election boycotts, Iran's Guardian Council, which is chosen by the Supreme Leader Khamenei, disqualified any other candidates with the potential to win the election. We know all too well about a lack of fair and free elections here in the States, but how will the results of Iran's presidential elections impact U.S. national security? Well, to that point, Raisi announcing this morning in his first interview since Friday's election that Iran's ballistic missile program and the nation's support for regional militant groups is, quote, non-negotiable, and that he has no plans to meet with Joe Biden. Instead, the president-elect called on the United States to return to the 2015 nuclear deal, which we withdrew from in 2018 under President Trump, and immediately fulfill the obligations agreed upon under the original deal. He also demanded that all U.S. sanctions be lifted and verified by Tehran. Immediately following the election, Amnesty International, a human rights advocacy group, called for an investigation into Raisi's involvement in the mass execution of Iranian political prisoners back in 1988. In response to the 1979 Islamic Revolution, then Supreme Leader Khomeini established a death commission made up of 4 men, including Raisi. The commission sought to execute nonviolent political prisoners who refused to pledge allegiance to the Islamic Republic and is believed to be responsible for the deaths of thousands of Iranian political prisoners. To this day, the executions have not been officially acknowledged by Iran, and Raisi has never addressed his alleged role in detail. However, he can be heard in released audio recordings of a 1988 commission meeting arguing in favor of the executions. And he now defends the executions in questions, going as far to say that he should be commended for his actions. Take a look.
یک قاضی در کسوت قضاوت، یک دادستان دفاع کرده از حقوق مردم، از امنیت جامعه، او باید مورد تقدیر قرار.
Many Iranian citizens are now clashing with the regime after taking to the streets to rightfully protest the nation's electoral process and the results of the election. Videos show forces of the Islamic Republic firing at civilian protesters. Take a look. And joining us now to discuss is Alireza Jafarzadeh, the Deputy Director of the National Council of Resistance of Iran and the U.S. Thanks for being here tonight, Alireza.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you.
Great. So now that Iran's new president is elected, what is different this year than the previous presidential elections in Iran, in your opinion?
Well, certainly this year, always the presidential elections are sham in Iran. They've never been about representation of the will of the people. But this year, particularly, I can highlight maybe 3 elements. Number one, the boycott that you mentioned earlier was so widespread that the journalists who were handpicked and taken to Iran to supposedly report about the high voter turnout, almost all of them exclusively basically said that there was nobody in the voting stations. People just rejected this regime big time. Even the official figures announced by the government shows that the countable votes were so low that all over the country, according to their own figures, 58% of the people boycotted the election. In the capital, Tehran, which is most important, over 80% boycotted. Our own tally, based on reports that we have compiled from over 1,200 observers in 429 cities across Iran, shows that the voter turnout was actually less than 10%. The second factor was that this election was taking place in the backdrop of nationwide protests. Some of the shots that you showed that you showed that the people were protesting big time all over the country. Over 200 cities were involved in the uprising against the regime, calling for the overthrow of this regime. And the regime had to fire on the peaceful protesters, killing 1,500 of them just to stay in power temporarily. And the third element is that the Supreme Leader had already decided who he wanted at the helm. He had already picked Ebrahim Raisi. He basically cleared the field for him, removing any obstacles, just to make sure that he becomes the next president, as he did. And the most important characteristic about him is that he is a notorious mass murderer, period.
So we have Raisi, who has this background, as you were saying, credibly accused of mass murder. He's someone who says he does not want to meet with Joe Biden. He's someone who the Iranian people seem to, in large numbers, reject, since many of them were boycotting the election. There's some fragility right there with the Iranian state. How should the U.S. be responding to Raisi and his new administration?
Well, I think the first thing the U.S. need to do, the same way the Europeans as well, they need to understand the new realities of Iran. The new reality is that the Iranian society is an explosive society. People have rejected this regime. They rejected it during uprisings. They rejected it by boycotting this election. Now there is a mass murderer in charge at the helm of the executive branch. And this mass murder has a horrible track record since very early age. He actually, he only had middle school education. And then at the age of 19, he became in charge of the Revolutionary Court in Karaj, which is the fourth most populated city in Iran, in charge of ordering execution of other people. And then in 1988, he was a member of that 4-member death commission, which you referred to, in charge of killing as many as 30,000 political prisoners in a matter of few months. The worst thing is that even today, when he had the press conference, he was boasting about it. He was so proud of killing so many people. He was asking the world to praise him for his murders. I think this by itself, the press conference today itself shows that the world need to really confront this person and this regime. The first, and foremost, they need to put this guy on trial, pursue international investigation of the crimes of the 1988 and also in 2019. There were calls by 7 UN experts calling for the investigation of that. You mentioned the Amnesty International, US Congress has called for the investigation. So that should be the top priority, especially for this administration that has said human rights and democracy is going to be at the center of their foreign policy. And this is, in fact, the best opportunity for the administration to take this issue head on and to show the Iranian regime, to show the Iranian people, to show the rest of the dictators and murderers around the world that if someone gets involved in murder and mass murder, there is accountability, no matter how many years ago or how many months ago.
Alireza, I always really appreciate your expertise in these matters. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
And when we come back, it's time for our Tonight in History Spotlight. You won't want to miss it next.